to the feature of our meeting today and talking about glazing certifications with Jeff Dalaba from was it NACC, the North American Contractor Certification.
That is
Jeff
correct.
is the director of program development for AGMT Glazier Certification. So Jeff, I know you do have a number of different programs that you run. So why don't you bring us up all up to speed?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I've been working on this project since 2014, specifically for the glazing side. But I work with AMS. AMS is a certification body and provider of certification services for independent industry organizations, associations throughout North America, including the IGCC program for insulating glass. They provide services for the IGMAC program for insulating glass, SGCC for safety glazing, and also the Window and Door Manufacturers Association, Air Water Structural Hallmark program, as well as their NFRC programs. And all those programs are driven towards performance of products. But there was a lot of discussion in the industry about, okay, we're certifying products, but if they're not installed correctly, it may not be as effective as if we're somehow controlling the installation as well. So this concept was born in 2014. It really started as a grassroots effort. From day one, it's been industry individuals from multiple companies, multiple areas of commercial construction that have been working with us on this project. It's grown significantly in the U.S. We do have some growth in Canada, but certainly need a lot more. And there's two different pieces to it, and I'll talk about both those pieces today. One is the North American Contractor Certification Program, or NACC, and that's specifically for glazing contractors, although it sounds like it might be for other trades as well. It's only for glazing contractors. And that's one piece, and that certifies glazing contractors based on the way that they conduct themselves and carry out business and installation processes. The other piece of this is the AGMT, or Architectural Glass and Metal Technician, another term for a glazer. But that's a hands-on test and a written test that tests glazers that have been in the business at least 7,500 hours of work to verify that they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to work independently. So I'm going to talk. I think the best lead into this, and when Rich was kind enough to ask me to talk about this today, I put some thought into it. I think one of the things that as an industry we really have to appreciate is what components come together to really create a better situation, what creates the best possible outcomes. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about quality systems, quality management systems, and how they affect building performance. From there, I'll go in and talk a little bit more specifically about the programs. So right from the very start, as we started this process back in 2014, we looked at different reports and different things to support, does it make sense to do something that's going to help the glazing industry? And one of the reports we looked at was the ASHRAE Journal. Their last study was in 2008. But they reported that roughly $10 billion in construction claims each year come in, and that's continuing to rise. The interesting thing is they tied 69% of those to water infiltration, and then further broke that down that 53% are related to faulty installations. Now we're talking about whole building envelope. I mean, we're talking about above grade and below grade. So not all those water infiltration issues are specifically to building envelope. But it certainly points to the fact of importance of glazing systems as a significant component of the building envelope. There's also a report put out by Zurich, and this is Zurich Insurance Company, and they reported that subcontractor defaults were on the rise, and projects that were 3 times the average value and similar claims for all trades came from glazing. They also reported the 11 of our largest claims in recent years came from curtain wall and subcontractor defaults. So then we take a look at the waterproofing handbook, which is a handbook for building envelope as a whole and waterproofing. And in the waterproofing manual, it talks about the 99%, 1% principle. Approximately 99% of water infiltration leaks are attributable causes other than material or system failures. Certainly not to say that a system won't fail, but it's more likely that there's going to be human installation errors that either cause that failure or contribute to that failure than the system failing itself. So what we've tried to drive towards through both certification of glaziers, but also evaluating entire glazing contractor firms, is to look to determine, is there a qualified installation team in place? In other words, in order to provide the best possible outcome on building envelope, there has to be a qualified team working on the project. Everything from the key management to the estimators and project managers to any assembly and fabrication that's done in the shop, the way materials are handled, getting to the field, and then final field installation. And so to date, there really hasn't been significant verifiable qualifications to evaluate a contractor. So bringing in the NACC program along with AGMT has been a way to drive towards a way to first of all set a standard for a qualified team, but also determine a means of evaluating them. So, going back to this again, we started this all with, okay, we're certifying products, and there's a lot of engineering and testing, architectural testing that goes into any building envelope products. The next step, if you're going to try and control processes, is to look at the glazing subcontractor. And how do we look at the glazing subcontractor? We have to look at their process controls. Do they have qualified people that are following specific processes that are written, that are industry best practices, and are they carrying them out? And then, of course, glazier competency. Better building envelope relies on a lot of things. I know, all of you on this call are involved in the industry and know all the things probably already, but it really drives towards minimizing air and moisture infiltration, making sure that any thermal isolation features are installed properly, adherence to solar shading and heat gain requirements, durability of the products like insulating glass, for instance, that can be affected by a poor installation. And really driving towards industry-leading practices for enclosure and ultimately for the general public safety and better occupant health and comfort. There's a lot of different reasons why a building envelope may not perform as expected. It can be from design flaws and construction defects, poor workmanship, installation failures, system and product failures, repair and maintenance after the installation that does not occur. But, we're going to focus on the middle three there: construction defects, poor workmanship, and installation errors. The other piece that has to be appreciated with building envelope, especially when you get into metropolitan areas, is that a failed glazing system can be extremely costly and incredibly disruptive to occupants within the building to repair. If you have to take the skin off an entire floor of a building because it was installed incorrectly or there was an issue with it, it's going to require moving out of the building, moving systems, and just a lot of disruption to the company that's there. So I think, to look at this a little bit more closely, I want to look at quality management systems and look at what that really means. A lot of times there's the thought process of, well, quality controls, we check our work, or our superintendent looks at everything. So, we have quality controls in place. But I want to expand on what we really mean by quality controls and what we're driving to through certification to ISO type systems. A definition of QMS, or quality management systems, and I'm going to just read this. A quality management system is a collection of business processes focused on consistently meeting customer requirements, enhancing their satisfaction through quality standards. It is aligned with an organization's purpose and strategic direction. So I want to focus on that for a minute and say, what we're talking about is a company developing their systems with assistance through certification and through some of the direction of the requirements of certification and samples and examples that we provide. We don't go into a company and try to tell them how to do business or try to completely and radically change the way that they do business. What we're looking for is for them to tighten up controls, tighten up written processes, tighten up the way that they conduct business and the way that fabrication and installation occurs. Okay. When we first started this and going out to contractors early on, and it really still continues today, um, we would go into a company and say, okay, you're doing some assembly of curtain wall frames. How do you know that they're being assembled correctly? And you could look around, there may not be any paperwork around, there may be a drawing, there may not be any installation instructions. They're being followed. And they say, well, they've been doing this for years. They've been doing this for years, so they know what they're doing. Or, my favorite is Bob. They point to Bob and they say, Bob is the foreman, and everything that happens when Bob's the foreman, it goes great. We never have any problems when Bob's on the job. And you start to very quickly realize that, a couple of things. First of all, there's a heavy reliance on the people or the process, instead of a reliance on, we have qualified people that are following proven processes. And there's a big difference there, relying on Bob, who's may have been there 20 years, he may have been there 30 years, and he may know everything, but is he there for every step of the installation? Is he going to see water diverters or end dams, as they're being installed? Is he going to make sure the gaskets are the right length? How much can Bob really do? And what if Bob isn't there for a minute, or he goes to lunch, or, doesn't make it to work that day? So we can't rely just on people. In order to drive towards better glazing projects, experience is important, but it's not an assurance of following proper procedures. Quality management systems isn't any one thing. I mean, the other thing we hear is, well, we have a quality manual. The quality manual may be sitting on the shelf collecting dust, and we certainly want to see that they have a quality manual, but it's not the most important piece. Having policies, procedures, processes, and verifications or quality checks are kind of what bridge the gap and bring this all together. The quality manual sets the high-level processes to bring this all together. But there's other pieces to it as well. When something doesn't go right, having corrective actions and preventative actions that are documented, looking for root causes so that things don't happen the same way twice. If something goes wrong, being able to correct it so it doesn't happen again. Of course, competent people and looking at what your customers are saying are important pieces of quality and need to be tied in. Having a quality manager that oversees the whole process and calibrated equipment, they're all pieces, they're all tied together through that quality manual, but there's a lot more to it. And that's why it's called a management system, not just a control. This is an example. We very strongly believe, as part of this certification, that you don't need 50-page procedures for most operations. Having a one-page procedure that covers at least high-level points and covers areas where something may go wrong or may not be done correctly, or a step might be missed, but covering those steps in a controlled process with a numbered document, with approvals and reviews of the document by management, is a way to start setting procedures for the organization. And this is just an example of what a procedure might look like. Why is quality management systems important, or so important? Well, this is an example here, and one of the things you may note here very quickly is that the perimeter joint is tight to or there is no perimeter joint basically on this particular installation. We see this a lot of times. System manufacturers will tell you that 95% of field visits are necessitated by installers not following fabrication installation instructions. So if you look at this more closely, the bottom sill receptor is tight against the substrate with the top of the sill flashing. There's no dynamic joint in there to allow for expansion and contraction. We see these kinds of things all the time. It's simply not following, there's two pieces to it. I mean, one is not being competent, and another piece is not following manufacturer's installation instructions that require a perimeter joint that's 3/8 of an inch in this particular instance. And that allows for the sealant to stretch and contract as well. Especially important in northern areas where we get 80 degrees or 90 degrees in the summertime and down to 0 degrees in the wintertime, or whatever. I guess I'm talking in Fahrenheit. I should clarify that. Here's another example. This is simply not understanding systems, not following directions. This is a modified unit, and what we're looking at here is we're looking at a cross section of it, but this is a thermally broken unit, and you can see the thermal breaks in the extrusions. But then when you look at the sill, it's solid. So in this particular instance, this was a correction that had to be put in place. The sill was actually bridging the gap and preventing any thermal isolation. And they were getting so much condensation on this unit that it was running down and onto the floor. So if you can see off the left-hand side, they basically had to build a trough on each of these units in order to capture that condensation. They couldn't get rid of it at this point without completely uninstalling and replacing the entire system. So they had to build a trough, which then captured water on the inside after it ran down, and then directed it back out and weeped out of the system. So, quality management systems helps to identify issues. It's a managerial tool. It involves the entire team. It's designed to be proactive and prevent defects, planned and systematic, documented processes, and preventing defects with a focus on processes and controls. Now, quality control is a piece of quality management systems, and a very important piece. We call it quality checks, quality control, or verifications. And that is a corrective tool. So that's looking at installed work or work that's been completed and involves an inspector. It's very reactive, which is helpful, but doesn't prevent issues in the first place. Basically, what you're going back and doing is you're inspecting the final product and trying to identify and correct deficiencies that have already been installed, versus quality management systems, which is what we're driving to, in order to prevent things from happening incorrectly in the first place and reducing defects. One of our contractors on the West Coast, I think, put this very eloquently. He said, "We spent significant resources fixing problems in the past that could have been avoided by putting quality management systems in place." And I'll paraphrase. Basically, they prevented the problems from happening up front, and were able to change the way that they do business by putting quality management systems into their operation. And then there's that question of, well, if we have trained glaziers, or we have glaziers that are red seal, or glaziers that know what they're doing, they've been through apprenticeship programs, these kinds of things shouldn't happen. We've been on all kinds of job sites and we see all kinds of things. We've seen setting blocks that are substituted. Actually, we saw popsicle sticks used as setting blocks at one point, which once they deteriorate, they're no longer setting blocks. Perimeter joints, which we've talked about. Shear blocks not installed correctly. This is an example, and I'm not trying to pick on Canada specifically. It's just an example, but this is a situation where a simple step in the manufactured installation instructions, which weren't on site, was not followed. So this was near an airport, high vibration area, and the system required anti-walk blocks, or W blocks, to be installed in order to hold the IG units in place. They weren't installed as part of the initial installation, and so the glass over time vibrated away to a point where you could slip a $10 bill through it. So verifications provide quality checks. So how do we go back and inspect along with procedures and processes? We call it verifications, and really what we're looking at is the what, how, and why. It can be random sampling along with a specific checklist that's created within the organization in order to go back and look at the specifics of areas where problems or failures may occur later. So let me just talk a little bit about some examples. We've all flown, and for the last 4 generations, the aviation industry has used checklists. Basically, from the early days of significant commercial aviation, the pilots have used checklists, the ground crews have used checklists, and the intent of that is to catch mental flaws inherent to all of us. flaws where, it just requires attention and thoroughness in order to make sure that they're not missed. I pulled this actually from a book by Atul Gawande called, and Atul Gawande is an endocrine surgeon at Brigham Women's Hospital in Boston. And he wrote a book called The Checklist Manifesto. And he does talk about the airline industry quite heavily in that, but he also talks about surgery in general. Would you want a surgeon going in and opening you up without following some type of a procedure, or without having a checklist to make sure they didn't leave the sponge inside or the tool inside? So checklists can be very important, and they shouldn't be limited to just airline industries or hospitals. There's certainly a place for them in every kind of business, especially in glazing where there's a high risk of failures. Verifications and quality checks tell supervisors what to look for. They tell everyone that quality is important. It really drives the workers to be more apt to elevate their performance. When you know somebody's going to check it, you're more likely to take a couple extra steps and look over your work and not rush. Identifies trouble spots. It helps give peace of mind to the contractor. It helps give peace of mind to the building owner, the GC. Everybody knows that it's being checked, and it drives towards better outcomes. So here's some examples, some of the things we drive for in this certification. Gaskets, having a checklist item for gaskets. Are they cut 1/4 inch longer per foot than the daylight opening? I know the glaziers don't always like this. They have to use worm juice and kind of jam it down in to get a longer gasket into the daylight opening. But this is a way to make sure that's happening. What does that mean? That means the foreman, when he does the checklist, goes back, he actually pulls out gaskets and verifies that they're doing them right. Not every gasket, but lot samples to make sure that they are following processes. On a backer pan, is insulation installed continuously with no gaps greater than 1/4 of an inch. There's an example, where the insulation was installed, but there was a gap left, which reduces the efficiency and can cause condensation issues internal to the back pan later. This is a favorite example here. In this particular example, glaziers are always looking for weep systems in order to make sure that the water drains out, and they kind of get that concept, but also weep orientation. In this particular pressure bar, the system allows for water to enter at the top. So this is actually installed upside down, but water enters the top and then weeps out through the bottom of the pressure plate, and the pressure bar and out through the pressure plate. So this is an example where they're installed upside down, and it's an example where installation instructions weren't followed. The glazier probably didn't have knowledge of the system they were working on, and they weren't checked. This entire building was done this way, and it could have been corrected by just popping off a couple of the pressure bars and doing quality checks or verifications on them. When things do go wrong, we want to look at the what, where, why, how, and basically find root causes. So part of quality management systems that we require also is to have a corrective action and preventative action process in place. That means that rather than just correcting things, they're actually documented. And then they also document the root cause and eliminate that root cause for future processes. Starts out by quantifying, how much money was lost by doing this. That helps to put importance on it. Determining the root cause itself, exploring different corrective actions or ways to prevent this in the future, and then implementing changes within the organization in order to make sure that quality improves. And then there's also the important piece of going back generally on an annual basis and doing an audit to make sure that you're monitoring the effectiveness of the corrective actions that have been put in place. Here's another example, another pressure bar here. But if you look at this, you can see where the arrow is, that this fastener appears not to be tightened down correctly. So here's how the discussion might go in that situation. The general contractor says, what happened or how did that happen? And they look at it and they say, well, yeah, the glazier didn't tighten down tighten down the fasteners enough. We dug into this more, and looking at this deeper, it was actually that they substituted fasteners. They were too long, so they were bottoming out, and couldn't be tightened. They were actually torqued down, but because they were bottoming out, they were substituted fasteners. The pressure bars wobbled and wouldn't have created any pressure situation for to seal. But in each of these cases, there's a lack of a well-defined operational procedure or verification process. In each of the examples I showed you, management relies too heavily on what they think their people know. Again, the people, the process, and not enough on defined processes. Management is focused on putting out fires in a lot of cases and not focusing on the business as a whole. And then, they're not looking for the whys of why this happened and correcting the issue. So we say trust but verify. You certainly want to trust your people, and we want to trust the contractors, but it does require verification. Proven products, along with quality subcontractors, quality systems, competent installers, and then where we come in is an independent third-party assessment. Another set of eyes coming in to verify that quality management systems are being followed. Now I'm going to talk about the certifications and really their mission. Now that we've kind of laid some groundwork for quality management systems, which is certainly a key component for these programs operating correctly. The first is for glazing contractors, the NACC program, and for glaziers, the AGMT program. These programs are up and rolling well in North America, not as well in Canada. And I think we have a lot of room to grow, and I think it's important, with the Fenestration Canada organization helping us to get the word out and helping to drive towards higher quality of projects in Canada, we can start to move the needle. Currently on the NACC contractor side, we have 70 contractors that have been certified. Of those 70, 68 are in the US and 2 are in Canada. The 2 that are in Canada are Ferguson Neudorf Glass in the Niagara Falls area, and Verval, which is in the Ottawa capital area of Canada. We currently have 28 glaziers that have been certified in Canada, have gone through certification tests and become certified. In North America, we have close to 1,700 glaziers that have been certified now. So as you can see, there's a lot of room for growth in Canada, and we're certainly interested in working with all the Canadian glazing contractors, organizations, and glaziers in order to start to drive this to have the same type of effect in Canada that it does already in the US. I do want to say, these aren't programs that were created by any one person. It's not something that I dreamed up or AMS dreamed up or any one person dreamed up. It's benchmarked. The benchmarks and criteria have been developed by the industry, and we've done that in multiple ways. We've done this through surveys and inputs by the industry, but I think most importantly, we have an industry board that is made up of glazing and curtain wall consultants, suppliers. We have glaziers. It's 2 glaziers that sit on the board, general contractors, glazing contractors, and so it's a way to have the entire industry come together in order to set criteria and drive towards higher standards within glazing. To give you some examples, general contractors we have on our board, we have Turner Construction and Clark Construction. Consultants, we have CDC, which is the largest in the U.S. We also have Yvonne Chazon out of Toronto, who is with Morrison Hershfield. And suppliers, we have companies like Dow Sealants and Conair that are part of our board. We've got glazing contractors from both the U.S. and Canada. Ferguson Neudorf is set on our board. So we really get we get input from all over the industry, as well as both the U.S. and Canada, to have a broader North American voice. The NACC program is handled through inspections or assessments. In the past, we've used the term audits. That does seem to scare some people, but we use the term assessments. And what what we look for is we're going out and we're assessing to verify that industry identified best practices and systems are in place. We also look at competency of management, ongoing training that's occurring at the estimator and project manager level, and then trained and verified installers as well. It's a 2-day assessment that occurs annually, and we have a 32-page, 50-category checklist. It breaks out into 5 different areas. Part of them are scored, so there's 20 scored items, and then there's 30 scored items, and there's 20 mandatory items that are evaluated. We have to document compliance with each area. So the first thing is business practices. That's really to make sure that the company is a legitimate business. They have the right insurance coverages in place. They can bond to the capacity of their WIP. They have the ability to, or they have workers' comp in place. They have technical staff and ownership that have been in place for and are competent. We look at safety. Do they have a written safety program that they're following? Do they have a qualified safety manager? Do they have their tickets in place? Are they following in compliance with what they say they do? Do they have glazing specific safety requirements in place that they're following? Contract administrative processes, that's how estimating and project management work to establish a job from the point of bidding on a job and looking at contract requirements to how they carry it out through project management. And then the last 2 pieces, quality and glazing processes, are what I kind of laid the groundwork for today. And that's looking at the quality management systems that's in place, a fully implemented quality management system, and then carrying out verifications and following the processes and process controls in the glazing area, both in the shop as well as in the field. The AGMT program for glaziers ties into being able to test glaziers based on the glazier body of knowledge. In setting this up, the first thing we had to look at were product elements, and this rolled out in early 2019. But looked at the product elements, and we had to establish an assessment of fundamental knowledge, skills, and abilities through a written and physical test. But our focus was and is today on minimizing defects and failures and conforming to requirements. So everything that's graded in the test focuses on areas where a defect or failure is most likely to occur. It's a voluntary program. It's open to all glazing technicians. They do have to have 7,500 hours of experience. And again, it was developed as well through this industry cross-section. We had the industry come together to design the test. They've written the questions for us. We had suppliers involved, general contractors involved, glaziers, glazing contractors involved in the test through peer groups. And that's how this test has been created. And it is ANSI accredited and third-party assessment controlled. We had to lay out a glazier body of knowledge. The initial body of knowledge we laid out was actually much larger than this. We had to scope it down so that we could get it into something that really focuses on the knowledge, skills, and abilities required for installing storefront, installing curtain wall, dealing with sealant, dealing with gaskets, being able to operate the tools of the trade, understanding documents and drawings and layout, glazing specific math, glazing theory. And so we laid out this glazier body of knowledge, and then we created tests that tie to this. So a glazier has to go through a 125 question, 2-hour multiple choice exam. And where this really separates is through the hands-on tests. We have test rigs that we ship all over North America. And the physical tests include a curtain wall test where they have to stick build curtain wall. And then it simulates 3 stories. They have to get all the anchoring correct. They've got to lay out the project, start from a benchmark, and install all the glass, the gaskets, and make sure that everything is done correctly. And then a storefront, an entrance, we're dealing with a 3070 door, basic storefront system. And we put a knee wall condition in this. And the knee wall condition really tests so they understand how to level the flashing and sill pan and get everything correct and caulk into the ceiling or the ceiling pockets to make sure there's not going to be any water dripping down through. and lay this all out correctly. So it really tests the glazier's knowledge by doing that. We also have, they're not pictured here, but a weather sealing and structural sealing test. And they have to go through dealing with a 90-degree angle and tapered joints, install correct backer rod. They're going to have to select different sizes in order to deal with the tapered joint and install the sealant. And then we measure the sealant to make sure that it is installed at the proper ratio to get that 2:1 ratio to allow the sealant to stretch and contract. And then also on structural sealing to make sure that they understand how to structurally seal without bubbles and gaps and so forth. Let's see, I'm going the wrong way here. These programs have been added to Master Spec, which really drives specifications in the US. We definitely need some help in Canada as well on specifications. But in the US, prior to having these programs in place, most specifications said, as far as installer qualifications, trained and approved by the manufacturer. Some would specify a number of years in business, some would specify completed similar projects, but basically everything was subjective. I mean, what is a similar project these days? Do you really see any two buildings that are truly similar? And what does 5 years in business mean? So having an ANSI accredited certification that can be called out in specifications is a way to significantly upgrade the requirements for glazing contractors and really help drive towards better projects in the industry. Both programs are ANSI accredited or accredited through ANAB, ANAB, formerly known as ANSI. Which provides a roadmap for a gold standard certification. It provides oversight of us as a certification body, provides accountability. They go on audits with us. They go out on the job sites with us. The ANSI auditors do. Protects the certified participants by making sure there's consistency and impartiality. And it really is a differentiator. Anybody could build a program and call it a certification program or provide a certificate. But when you're going through ANSI requirements and following ANSI guidelines to ISO standards like ISO 17065 for the NACC program or ISO IEC 17024 for personnel certification for the AGMT program, it provides a gold standard and a path to run on. That's all I have. I'd like to ask, for any questions or anything from the audience. And one question that I really have is, why has Canada been so slow to adopt this North American Glazing initiative? Some of that maybe we aren't getting the word out. Some of it may be perceptions. Some of it may be, well, we already have Red Seal. So, I'd really love either now or text me or email me or something in the future. And I'd love any thoughts that you have.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. I can tell Pat has a question. He's jumping through the screen. So, Pat, what do you got?